Tape 5 of Survivors of the Shoah interview with Jack Gross, November 9th, 1997.
My uncle, who lived in Budapest, did manage to get his oldest son into this group that I mentioned, this Zionist group that took children, mainly orphans, from Budapest into this group. This was part of the deal they worked out.
Do you know how?
Sorry?
Do you know how he managed to do it? Or?
No. But I suppose he lived there, he had the connections, so he managed to do it. So he was legally there. He was sort of with the original list.
Was there a real list that was going around?
Yeah, later on they made a real list. I mean, there was as I said before, there was very sloppy, no control, and I just put myself in and I could assume name. And then right there in the hotel they started to take down names. And whoever was there, they figured if you're there, you must have been sent by someone. You're not just, the control was not very good.
What was the name
The
of
Germans then finally made a real list. I mean, they knew exactly what was there, who was there.
What was the name of the hotel?
I don't remember. Anyways, so when we were there on this open field for days, I finally discovered I have a cousin there, this Babat boy, okay? He was 9 years old, that's all he was. He was a real kid, he was a small kid. But he was under tutelage of some group leader there, so he was all right, he was taken care of. Okay, to continue the story. Anyways, well, after a few days, all of a sudden we get orders into the train, we're traveling, we're going on. Went on to Austria, went by Vienna, went through all kinds of cities, and came all the way to Bergen-Belsen, which is northern Germany, northern part of Germany, Hanover province, whatever. And there we took us to regular concentration camp, meaning with the barracks. The way camps were set up with barracks and all. But with one difference, they did not give us any prisoner clothes or did not give us any numbers. So I knew right away that we were privileged, we were special on our treatment. However, what they did there is Germans were more methodical. They had a table there and they took everybody's name down, their birth date and their nationality and everything. And there's where again, luck was with me and against me. My name is Gross, and 6 weeks after we arrived, alphabetically from A to G, were taken to Switzerland right away. I guess it was sort of a down payment or something, that the Germans wanted to show goodwill. So they took about 300-400 people, so I wasn't one of them. I took Schwartz, so I stayed on. The other thing was, lucky though, that they asked everybody's nationality. And some people that came from my part of the country, like from Cluj, they're Romanians. All of a sudden they're Romanians. They figured it was always Romania, made a mistake. And since Romania jumped out of the alliance, they considered them as the enemy. Anybody who came to Romania was not liberated with this group. They stayed on and they perished there. Lucky I was Hungarian. And they took your word. Whatever you said, they marked it down. That's it.
What was people's reaction to coming to Bergen-Belsen?
Well, people's reaction at the time was astonishment. But the leadership there was his relatives. Dr. Fischer was an older man who was the one everybody turned to information, what's happening. And he was given, and he must have had some contact with his son-in-law all this time, through the Nazis, to the Germans. And he told us, this is part of the plan, we'll have to be held there. He told us first only 10 days we'll be there. That's what was told. From 10 days became 6 weeks. That was the first down payment, 6 weeks. And then it became, the rest of us stayed there to 5 months. Now, the treatment there was not harsh. I mean, we were not given food. We're given the same ration as all the other refugees there, all the other prisoners. But we're not put to work, hard labor. All you had to do is take care of our own barracks and our own cells, our own sanitary facilities there, which was very few. But anyway, and we're given bunkers. I mean, not bunkers. Sorry. How do you call these beds? These two-layered beds. Anyways, and decent blankets. I mean, we were no prisoners' clothes, and we had our own leadership who made us do things on a daily basis. And one of the things were, for instance, because it was a Zionist organized group, it was forced, in fact, on us to take Hebrew lessons, to get to know about Palestine, about the geography, not learning Torah or anything like that. No, no. Just about what concerns the Zionist objective. Anyway, and that's why I learned Hebrew a little bit, and we had a chance to move about. I mean, we were free to move about during the day. The time was ours. We were not hamstrung. Time was long. For some people, they went crazy. They went because they started losing hope. First of all, the food was very, very meager. I mean, it was substandard in quantity and quality. I mean, we used to get, for instance, for morning, used to get a little bit of warm water with colored water, it looked like tea or something, and a little piece of bread, a very small piece of bread. At noon, I used to get a bowl of looked like potatoes, but it wasn't. It was some kind of a kohlrabi, which is a cheap vegetable. It's very cheap, which they usually give to horses, and it was cooked, and that we got for lunch, and it was very small, very little. And at night, you got again a cup of hot water with a small piece of bread. That was the whole thing for the whole day. Now, some of our people there that came from their homes had canned goods and all kinds of goodies prepared. Some of us didn't, like the children didn't. I mean, they came from hostels, from home, and myself included. So it was very bad. I mean, everybody lost weight very fast, and you get to be a very bad mood, and things got to start to get ugly. Meaning that, as you know, when people are in good mood, they're friendly with each other, but when things start getting bad, they get very nasty with each other. I mean, we normally got along pretty well in our barracks, but when things, as the time progressed, and people got colds, there was no bad. The weather turned colder. Northern Germany gets very cold in October, November, December, rain season, and people got to be very nasty with each other. There were fights, and people got depressed. Some people even lost their mind. Okay, they got berserk. Remember also, these people came from good homes, from very wealthy homes, were not used to any hardships at all, and they just couldn't take it. People like myself were used to hardships, who were in yeshivas and cheders, they didn't eat so well, they didn't have anything. We managed somehow. We survived. But anyway, the situation got very bad, to the point where we lost hope already. Whereas on one day, Kastner himself appears in an SS uniform, I think the rank of a lieutenant or something, and accompanied by a big shot, another SS, we don't know who that was, and visited his father-in-law, who I happened to be in his barrack. You see, the barracks were divided. We did it ourselves in our own way. The religious had their barracks, and the others had their barracks. And I wasn't religious. I didn't care at that time, so I was with the non-religious. I was with Dr. Fisher, in fact. I was in the same barrack. And so he came to visit him, and he was giving us assurance at the time that things are still alive. It's not over. As you know, I don't know if you know, but there was a snag in this whole thing. The Allies didn't want to give in to their demands. And the Germans at the time were willing to compromise already. They wanted money instead of trucks. But the amount was tremendous, and the only source was America at the time, the only Jewish community that was still intact. The American joint did not come through with it. Whether it was policy or it was lack of money, to this day we don't know, but they did not come through. Anyway, he came to tell us at the time that it's not over, don't lose hope, that things will happen.
Had you ever seen him before?
Never, no.
How did people talk about him at the time?
Oh, he was a savior. I mean, Dr. Kastner, he had the title of doctor. Yeah, especially when he came and he gave us hope that things will still happen, But 10 months go by again, and nothing happened. And then things get so bad. I mean, for the Germans themselves, it got worse because the war was getting close to Germany, and they were bringing all the prisoners from the other camps to Germany. Like from Auschwitz, they were marching them, this famous march you heard about. We saw them, unfortunately, go by our camp, straggling people, half dead, tired from walking hundreds of miles. And those who survived were there, and so we saw, the spirit, our spirit was really sagging because we saw what's awaiting us, that this is what we're going to look like, this is what's going to happen. Their rations also became smaller. Their water supply, because they brought all these people, their water supply diminished. They used to shut off water for hours and hours. We couldn't drink, couldn't wash ourselves, Even the ration, as I said before, the rations, even as meager as it was getting worse and worse, less and less all the time. So we saw that things either have help fast or else we're going to go back. So the spirit was sagging, and I must inject here that this is when I had a chance to see the Satmar Rebbe, that he's a great man, in spite of all the bad things I said, that his spirit was not sagging. I mean, he was always invigorating and giving courage to us and telling us, because I was hanging around him, okay, even though I was in another barrack, I was hanging around. Sort of I figured like he's like a father figure, okay, I had to have somebody to hang on to.
Were there others that did that as well?
Not many, no. And this is something I want to tell also. How people's character, how people's, on nature of people, how I observed how people are so different in different situations. How adversity can change you and how good times can change you again. For instance, they used to call him Rabbi Yoelish, never called him the Rebbe. At that time it was a derogatory word, Rabbi Yoelish. Never gave him the title the Rebbe. Why? Because in the leadership of Budapest were Ashkenazi, not Hasidim, were modern, what you call today modern Orthodox. And just like today, they don't like Satmar. They didn't like Satmar then either, not because of Zionism. That wasn't the issue at the time. It's because they're different. They're so different. And and he happened to be in Orthodox barrack where they're all Hungarian Budapest Jews, the modern Orthodoxy. And he had no cooperation from him. For instance, he keeps. You see, they had them regular minyan. They wouldn't stop. In the barrack itself, a little corner, they davened. They had their zmanim. Here's a different zman. I don't know if you know about this. The Satmar zman is entirely different. I mean, in Bergen-Belsen, in Bergen-Belsen, it's northern Germany, it's northern part of Germany, and therefore the Shabbos is very late. Okay, the nightfall is very late. And he used to be up till 11, 12 o'clock to make Osh Shabbos, okay? And they wouldn't cooperate with him. He wanted to have a minyan to daven out. They wouldn't stay up. You see, they had this rule, 9 o'clock is curfew, okay, 9 o'clock curfew. But nevertheless, if you did it quietly after 9 o'clock, because even for them it was too early, 9 o'clock was main daylight. But they're Ashkenazi, they compromised on the Shabbos, they davened early. And he was fighting them. And they wouldn't give him this much kavod or this much respect, nothing, they wouldn't do anything. So he used to call me and a couple others to come late to his barrack, sneak into his, you're not allowed to go from barrack to barrack after 9 o'clock. It was dangerous, but we snuck in there and to make a minyan for him. Another thing he had, and this is a strange thing that he had something, he believes in dreams, And there is something in our tradition that is a Posach Cholam. You heard about that? That just like in the ancient story with Joseph and where you interpret dreams, there's also prayer for you have bad dreams, to have 3 people tell you that everything's right. I don't know if you ever saw this prayer. It's in the prayer books. Anyways, he believed in that, and he must have very strange dreams. And he didn't trust many people to come, so he had Ashkenazi, his gabbai, myself, and one other boy. This other boy, his name was Ross, from Budapest. He was an Ashkenazi, but he was a great admirer of this rabbi because he was a learned man, a young boy. And the 3 of us were Posach Cholam. So he used to be called quite often. Ashkenazi must come, so I knew already what it was. It's quite often. Anyway, what I want to say is this, that he was in this barrack called the C barrack, which is the Orthodox Jews, and he had a lot of problems, no respect whatsoever. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. When we came to Switzerland, finally arrived to Switzerland, remember there were some very important people in this transport. There were opera singers, there were famous surgeons. There were big lawyers, big business people, millionaires. When they arrived to Switzerland, the press, all of a sudden, only seeked out the Irish. Only want to see the Satmar Rebbe. It's the only people they want to see. They want to see nobody else. And they make a big splash in the Swiss press about the big Rebbe from came last night. We came 3 in the morning. When these people saw the great respect he's getting from the Swiss community, not just the Jewish community, but the general press, they all turned to him and they came to him and I saw that hypocrisy was tremendous. And I can even name names, which I hate to do, but I know names. The Stern family is a rich family in Budapest, and they have offspring here. They're all very rich, well-to-do. They were terrible anti-Irish. And when they came to Switzerland, the Rebbe lived in Geneva in a nice villa. Okay, they gave him a villa, beautiful villa. I was in the Rebbe's house for 6 weeks. I'll tell you why later, how I came to be there. So I was in the house, and I saw these people coming to him, to the Rebbe, kissing his hand, and giving him all the respect, and boasting about how they helped him in Bergen-Belsen. It was all not true. And to this day, their offspring are to this day big shots there, the Satmar Rebbe, the Satmar community. I tell whoever wants to listen there, the Satmar, that what happened in Bergen-Belsen. There are very few people today who can tell this story. Anyway,
anyone else?
I'm digressing. I'm getting away from the subject, but we're getting back to Bergen-Belsen when we got there. So when we were not when we got there, but after a while, the mood changed and how pessimistic we got.
Did people celebrate the Jewish holidays as well?
Pardon me?
Did you celebrate the Jewish holidays as well?
Yes, we're allowed to celebrate. We're allowed to we're davening every day. We're allowed to daven.
Some people had tefillin?
Some people had tefillin. Those who came from homes had tefillin. I didn't have tefillin, but some people had tefillin. The Rebbe certainly had all the stuff with him. He had the shofar, in fact, the shofar, yeah.
Did they blow it for Rosh Hashanah?
Yeah. I was davening in his minyan, Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, yeah. He made his own minyan, of course. He davens differently than the Ashkenazi. So.
Was that a different type of a minyan than you'd been used to?
No, like at home, yeah. Of course, they didn't have all the people there. We had just barely minyan. But, yeah. But I must tell you that he was a great, I noticed in him the greatness in adversity that he was there. He was always smiling, always telling us things will be all right, and made his business to talk whoever wants to talk to him. And he was usually not very accessible. In the old country, you have to wait days before you can see the Rebbe. But there he seeked out people to talk to, and to give chizuk, okay? And
did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that.
Do you remember any specific?
Like what, for instance?
Where he gave chizuk?
Well, he was, first of all, he was telling us not to lose hope, things will be all right. And of course, he was always bringing in God will help us, and God will redeem us, and so on and so on. And he wasn't giving mussar to anyone. I mean, he knew that I wasn't religious and all that, he never said a word about it, he knew the circumstances, you do what you can, that's all. And no, he was, and I must tell you also, the Rebbetzin is a great lady. Although she has a lot of people who have, complaints today. She saved his life. For instance, he would not eat from what they brought from the kitchen, that cooked vegetables that I told you about before. No, he would not eat that because it was in the pots, they cooked everything. I don't know, there was no fat there, I assure you. There was nothing there. There's no pork or anything in there. But he would not eat that. So what she did is she was great. The little piece of bread she had, she bribed some guards, not German guys, the Jews were working on these kitchens and these going and coming from this food distribution. It was all done by Jews. And she bribed these Jewish guards with a little piece of her own ration to bring them boiled potatoes, to boiled in a shell, potatoes in a shell. And that's what he lived on, potatoes, and he ate the bread also. Bread he ate, and the potato, that was his whole thing. And he drank the tea that they gave, that's all, but he would not eat the food from them. And she practically gave away her ration, so she'd have that. And she was thin like this when she came out. She was very thin. She was emaciated. But anyway, so I must say that he's a great man. He was a great help to me personally. Okay.
Did you talk to him a lot?
Yes. Yes.
And what would he say?
A lot, not a lot. I mean, how much can I talk as a boy? How much do I have in common with him? I wasn't that learned to speak to him about Torah or anything else. But we talked about the situation and what happened to Hungarian Jews. And one thing, he had a big complaint. And this is the complaint that is my issue today, is that the Hungarian Jewry leadership did not do enough to warn us or to tell us or to organize us into resistance. They did not lift a finger. That's what his complaint. They did not lift a finger. And this did not endear him to the establishment after the war, naturally, aside from his other ideological differences. But this theme he carried through after the war. He didn't shy away from telling that to anybody who wanted to hear it. When he came to Switzerland, the head of the Jewish community came to see him. His name was Sally Meyer. And he came in good spirit to give him his respects. Instead, he walked out with his head down, because the Rebbe really let him have it in no uncertain terms. He wasn't very diplomatic or very tactful. When he had to say something, he said it in plain words. That his one particular complaint was about a fact, which is a fact. There's a Rabbi Weissmandl in Czechoslovakia, who had the same contact as Kastner had in Budapest, had some contact with some big man there, big Nazi, who wanted only a relatively small amount of money, relatively speaking, I think $5,000 or $10,000 for every Jew that he can save. And it would amount to $1 million, $1.5 million. He wanted to save. There's only a few Jews left there in this town. He wanted to save them. And he was sending messages all over to Zionists in Jerusalem, to Jewish Agency in Palestine, to the Budapest Jewish Agency, to the Swiss joint, to the American joint. No response from anywhere. And that's what really angered him. At least try. Why didn't you try to do something?
How did you hear about this?
Well, I heard about it from him. I was there. I was in Geneva, living in his house for 6 weeks.
We'll talk about that.
So I was there when this Sally Meyer came to see him, and I happened to be in the room because the noises were going on. You know, he was screaming at the top of his voice, so we were scared what happened. So I ran in, and he was telling him the story about Weissmandl. Just one example, of course. He was telling about many things, but this is the one thing, because this Sally Meyer received a letter from this Weissmandl. He's the one who was personally involved and had a chance to get this thing put together. He did.
Did he respond to the Rebbe?
No, he was just silent. He didn't have it. What could he respond? He didn't. He didn't respond. No, he did not respond. He did not respond. He just walked out with his head down, and that's all. Offended, very insulted that he came to give him his respect, and he goes away with insults. Anyway, we're going off on a little tangent here, but I'd like to go back to where about Bergen-Belsen. We're still in Bergen-Belsen, and in October, November, the days got colder and rainy. It's a rainy part of the country then. And people got sick, and things started to get really bad. We really had thought that this is the end. One day, December 3rd, I think, one cold day, we're standing at Appel. Appel means that you had to go out. Every morning they counted us. Every morning they had to go out to the barracks, and they counted us every morning. You had to stand there sometimes freezing weather till they got through it. This was a part of the system there. One day we go out to Appel, and they tell us, today you will be going on a train. Didn't say where. You'll be going on a train. You'll be leaving. Pandemonium, you know, everybody was happy. Where we go on a train, not on a freight train, on a regular train. This was a good sign. Get all your belongings, take everywhere you can with you, and we're going to be leaving. Sure enough, they started to take us slowly to a train. We had to walk because there's no railroad track right there. Anyway, we went to a regular train, passenger train, which was tremendous. And at the train, they told us that it would be taken to Switzerland. Okay? The distance from Bergen-Belsen to Switzerland is maybe 18 hours or so, maybe 20 hours in normal times, from northern Germany down to southern Germany. The trip took us about 4 days.
Before we talk about that, in Bergen-Belsen, were there any people fight over food or anything like that?
Yes,
How did people treat
there were
each other?
fights over food. There were fights, for instance, when you stood in line. You had to stand in line to get your bowl filled with that slop from noontime. And people were so hungry that they were fighting for, you gave him more, you gave him less, and you know, what do you give him more? Why do you favor him? I mean, they were grabbing things from each other's hands. They were also stealing. You heard a lot of people lost their bread ration. You know, from that bread ration, you used to keep yourself a little bit for late at night. You were up late at night, you have a little bit something to, used to disappear. Yeah, there were terrible, ugly scenes there really starting.
Did some people get very sick?
Yes, some people got typhus. Now, what happened to them, I don't know. I don't remember. That is, maybe I knew at that time. I don't remember anymore. I believe that certain people stayed on for two reasons. One, that gave their nationality as being Romanian, and second, those who were very sick, who were in hospitals.
Were you able to have any other contact with other inmates in the camp?
No, we were forbidden. The camp had wires. What do you call these barbed wires between sections, and on the left and on the right there were prisoners from Holland, mostly Dutch prisoners, and were under threat of being shot at by the guards, who were not allowed to speak to them. Nevertheless, curiosity couldn't help. We had to speak to them and find out what happened to them. So we were talking back to back instead of face to face. You were facing one way, they were facing the other way, and talking sort of quietly. And they told us that they were from Amsterdam, and that Anne Frank was amongst them. At that time, she was still alive. And they were actually not talking about Anne Frank. Anne Frank wasn't famous at the time. They were just telling us about the family, the Frank family from Amsterdam. Anne Frank was nothing at that time. She wasn't. Anyway, and that most of them from Amsterdam, and that they are working very hard. And we saw that, used to bring him away 6 in the morning, and that a lot of them are dying from diseases. You know, they just can't take it. Bergen-Belsen was not an annihilation camp. It wasn't brought to kill people, or just to wear them out and to die. However, what happened to Bergen-Belsen, this was our luck, that in the month of December, when the other camps closed down, they brought a tremendous number of people to Bergen-Belsen. They decided to kill them differently. Just shut the water off, shut the food, didn't give them food or water. And that's why, if anyone knows about Bergen-Belsen, the horrible scene of Bergen-Belsen wasn't so much the crematoria or anything like that, but it's the tremendous number of cadavers that just died, terrible, horrible deaths from hunger and starvation, and the lack of water, mainly, and typhus and whatnot.
At the end of tape 5. This is tape 6 of Survivors of the Shoah interview with Jack Gross, November 9th, 1997. Was there ever any time that you ever left the camp?
Well, only for short walks to a public bath, showers, and delousing. The Germans are very, 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 very set on DDT, powder. Every time we went to shower, we had to be deloused. And that was that time. DDT was the big use. Anyway, the thing that impressed me at that time was two things. The stories I heard from these Polish refugees back in Hungary, that showers in Auschwitz meant death. So the first time we went to a shower was not in Bergen-Belsen, was in Linz, Austria. When they took us from Hungary and they kept us for 3-4 days in the fields, they realized we wouldn't bathe, we wouldn't shower, so they took us to as soon as we got to the Austrian, crossed the Austrian border, they took us to a place called Linz. And there they had some public baths, and they took us to these, to delouse us again, to shower us and delouse us. At that time, that seemed to me like either a military or a prisoner type of showering. It was very crude, very cold, and very ugly looking. And the thought of these Polish Jews came back to me, oh, maybe this is the end. This is the shower that we're dreading about. But no, it wasn't, of course. It was, in fact, it was very nice hot water. It was good, felt very good. But the thing that was also interesting about that first encounter with the showering is that they insisted on everybody's cutting their beards off, because that was part of delousing, no chance of lice getting in. And those who had long hair also. The Satmar Rebbe kept his beard, okay? And today, if you talk to a Satmar Hasidim, they call it one of the big miracles that how he escaped cutting off the beard. And we still don't know to this day, but I think that I know that the secretary, the Gabbai, told one of the German officers that he's a saint, he's a big man. And he let him go. They let the beard on. And ever since then, in Bergen-Belsen, which was a weekly showering thing, the delousing affair, when we went, he kept his beard. And everybody else had to shave, cut off his beard. But he was left his beard. Yeah. Anyway, so
Did he change in any way from the person you knew before the war?
No, not change at all, no. That's, again, another of his strength, that he did not change. And if you want to talk about him, I can tell you a little more about him. For instance, his anti-Zionist stance stems from before the war. This is not something after the war, after the creation of the State of Israel. When the Swiss asked us to leave, the Swiss did ask us to leave constantly. You know, this was one of the agreements that we made with the Swiss. This is one of the agreements that the joint signed with the Swiss government, is that after the war, that this transport will leave Switzerland, will not settle in Switzerland. And so, as part of the bargain, the Zionist organization made sure that some of them go to Palestine, whoever wanted to. I was in the house, in the rabbi's house, in Geneva, when the debate went on among him, the Rebbitzin, and the Gabbai, where to go. He had a chance to go to America, he had a chance to go to Israel. And he was an anti-Zionist from a long time before, and in spite of that, he said he wants to go to Eretz Yisrael, to the Holy Land. Not to a Zionist country, but the Rebbitzin and the Gabbai want to go to America. Okay? But so I just want to say that he, in spite of his hatred of Zionism, he still loved Israel, still thought Israel was the place to go.
Why do you think he wanted to go to Israel?
Why? Because it is Eretz Hakdosha, the Holy Land. Okay? And getting back to this anti-Zionist stance, he did not change since before the war. He was anti-Zionist before the war, but I want you to know, and I want everybody to know, that 99% of Judaism, of Jews in Eastern Europe, were against Zionism. Zionism was a very despised organization. It was very looked down upon. Only a very few adhered to it. Therefore, his problem was that he did not change, unlike some other great rabbis after the war, when he saw what happened in the Holocaust and that you need a country and all this, did change. He did not. He remained with his idea. Now, whether this is to be commended or not, but to make my point that he did not change since before the war. He was steadfast in his belief all along. And that's why it makes him outstanding in the eyes of most jury, that they're despised. I mean, they're not liked because of their stance. But this was the stance that all of them took before the war. So he's not alone in this, except he survived. Luckily, he survived. Of the very few that survived.
Did many people come to ask him advice in Bergen-Belsen?
No, no. In Bergen-Belsen, as I said, he was not respected. He was not revered except by a very few who knew him, knew he was, or wanted to know who he was. They all knew who he was. They all knew who he was.
Do you remember some of the other people you were together with in Bergen-Belsen?
Yeah, there was the Rebbe from Debrecen, big Rebbe, the Debrecen and Rov.
What was his name?
I think Strasser or Strassman or something. His offspring are here, living here in Brooklyn. As I mentioned before, the Stern family, there's members of the Freudiger family. The Freudiger family was really the head of the Jewish community, the old established Jewish community. He was pushed aside. And he was pushed aside in such a sense that he was still in the community, but he was not, didn't have a say in matters. If I may interject here something about Freudiger, since you brought this up. During the Eichmann trial, what I mentioned before came out clearly, that the Jews were misled by the leadership. And Freudiger was taking the stand at the time against Eichmann, of course. And he broke down and cried that how they failed the Jews. He admitted, in other words, he admitted, mea culpa, that they did fail. That was Freudiger, okay? Now, part of his family, he himself was not, he survived Budapest, but part of his family was in that transport, that group. Names I don't remember, but I do remember there were very, very respectable people there, or people that were known in the country, okay?
How did the Germans treat you in the camp?
Fairly well. Fairly well. In fact, they assigned to us an SS officer who was an older man, who didn't have so much venom in him, and he was telling us, briefing us sometimes on world events. I mean, not, just that how the war is going. He was telling us at one time the war is not going well for them. That's how we found out that things are turning around. And now he was pretty good. And I think that, and I have to say, I think that he's the man who perhaps saved the Rebbe's beard and didn't want it to cut off. And he was an older man, still an SS man.
Do you remember
but
his
it was
name?
a high rank. It was a high rank. No, I don't remember his name. No. I didn't keep diary. I didn't keep any notes. This is just an experience.
Is there anything else you remember about Bergen-Belsen?
Well, in general, I'd say it wasn't a terrible experience, unlike the other experiences of people had in concentration camp. Toward the end, it went bad. It turned to be bad, and people started to be despondent and losing hope. And luckily that we came in the right time, that we were saved. We went to Switzerland.
Did anyone commit suicide?
There was an attempted suicide, yes. There was some slashing of wrists and things like that, yeah. There were people who really went berserk. I mean, they really went, yeah. I remember my own camp, there was a man who started to talk nonsense. He went off his rocker. And they all said because he's so pessimistic about his outlook. You see, again, the food had a lot to do with it. The food rationing got less and less, and their supply depleted. They didn't have any more these sardines and cans of good stuff that they brought along, the chicken liver and all this stuff. And so that was a great factor in them. They were malnourished and couldn't take it.
Did you ever see anyone get beaten or?
No. So, anyways, to leave Bergen-Belsen for now, we went through this train, and it was a pretty good experience because, first of all, it was set like civilized people on benches and little cubicles. But we were stopped many, many times. reason were given, of course, with SS guards all the time. And the reason were given that the lines were bombed constantly. They had to find different routes to bypass. Germany at that time was in a pretty bad state already. I mean, there was the Allies bombed the hell out of them. Why they couldn't bomb the lines to Auschwitz? This is a question that's being asked by many. But what I'm trying to say is that their target at the time were railroads, because this was the means of transportation, the main means of transportation for the army. So that affected our trip to Switzerland. It took from what's supposed to be a day or so, it took about 4 or 5 days. The rationing was not bad. They gave us a little bread and even gave us butter for the first time, and some hot tea. So we're okay, we could manage. But there's one incident that I remember was terrible. It was stupid but terrible. The Satmar Rebbe, as I told you way before, he had to have washed his hands all the time. I mean, he's very pedantic in this. And I was with him in the same little cubicle. There were 6 people in that cubicle, okay? You know, like trains are, you know how they are, like in America, okay?
Remember the names?
Yeah, I can tell you the names. There was, of course, the Rebbe, the Rebbitzin, and Ashkenazi, myself, and there was a fellow named Roth. His first name I don't remember. There's a young man, Roth, and one other older man, okay? Now, this Roth was not really a chosser, but he was following the Rebbe like a dog. I mean, he really did not let him go for a minute. And one time we stopped in one of these big railroad yards late at night, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, pitch dark. In Germany in those days, everything was dark. And the Rebbe needed water. So he volunteered to go. You see, as you know, these steam engines need water to be filled. They have pumps. Every railroad they have pumps. And see, we're experts at this already because we were there 4 days on the road already. You see how these railroads work with these pumps. And he volunteered to go down and get water in one of these pumps, which is stupid. Started in wartime, in darkness there. But he went, and he didn't make it back on, and the train started to move. And where's Roth? Roth is not here. What to do? We stopped the train. They have these emergency brakes. That's dangerous in wartime to stop a train. So the SS come running, and of course they tell which one, they know which wagon, and they came running to us with their rifles. What's slow? What's going on? We told them, we lost a man. For that you stop a train? Let's go. As we talk, Roth knocks at the door. He's there with his pitcher of water. So they saw, he looked like a schlepper, you know. He's not well cooked, okay? He didn't keep himself very well. With his pitcher of water, and they laughed. Okay, let him go. But that's an incident, to this day I tell it to them, you know, they're amazed. Anyway, so we get to Switzerland. It was 2 in the morning. The Red Cross awaited us. It was an effort by the Joint and the Red Cross. The Red Cross got themselves involved. They received us very nicely with hot Ovaltine. To this day, I tell my children, drink Ovaltine. That was the thing. They called it that time Ovalmaltine, not Ovaltine. Anyways, it's a Swiss product, by the way. Anyway, they received us, and they took us right over to baths, again, 2 baths, okay? Showered us and gave us new clothes. For me, that was a pleasure. I had one shirt that I came with for 5 months. I kept washing the same shirt. It was torn to pieces. And they gave us used clothes, of course, but that's fine, you know. It's, Red Cross, used clothes. And they took us right away to a hotel, which was, in peacetime, I guess it was a tourist hotel, but in wartime it was empty. So they took us to a hotel and gave us food.
When is this?
That was on December 7th. To this day, that day is celebrated in Satmar as one of the biggest holidays there, the biggest parties, the biggest banquets. They call it Sudas Hadoa. Anyway, the press was all around the Satmar Rebbe, okay? Pictures all over the papers with his hat, his funny hat and his funny beard. And he was a younger man then. He was only in his 50s at the time. And there they split us up into different, I guess the place couldn't contain all these people. So some of them went to, a day or two after, to Montreux. Actually, it was outside Montreux, Caux-sur-Montreux. Nice little resort place, which in peacetime is very expensive. They took us there to a hotel. It was in the middle of the winter. Terrific skiing. I mean, we just saw the skiers all around. Anyways, that's what it took some of us, and I was there with the Rebbe also, okay? And there they already arranged for, they had, in Montreux, they had a small yeshiva. One of the Soloveitchiks, one of the famous Soloveitchiks, lived in Montreux, and he had a yeshiva there, and they arranged for kosher foods for those who wanted it. And of course, the Rebbe was giving the right food already at that time. He brought them food. I sort of separated myself from the Rebbe already at that time. Why? I think because I was sick, okay? First of all, they took me into a hospital right away. Yeah. What my sickness was to this day, I don't know, but I know I was emaciated. I know all they did to me is they gave me food in the hospital. They gave me soups and all kinds of stuff. In Montreux itself, they had a hospital. And so I lost contact with the Rebbe at that time, and from the whole group. That hospital in Montreux was just a small hospital, so I decided to take me to Basel, where they had the only Jewish hospital. And it's called the Israelitische Hospital. Anyway, they kept me there for 6 weeks in Basel, and they brought me back to health, and they finally decided to discharge me. When they and in the meanwhile, in Basel, I was not a real patient. I could go out. I mean, they let me go out and dress up and go out to the city. They gave me freedom. And I acquainted a Jewish family by the name of Kraus. They invited me to come to their house for Shabbos, for a meal here and there. And I did. When they discharged me in the 6 weeks, they said, here, you go. I know where to go. So I called up the Red Cross. The Red Cross called up the Jewish agency. Here's a boy, he has nowhere to go. And it was before Pesach, the spring sometime. So the Jewish agency decided to send me to a home, a Zionist home, one of these homes where they prepare children to go to Palestine, Hachsharad. Okay? It was not a religious home. It was boys and girls together. And I was only a 15-year-old boy. So. And I didn't like the idea. Okay, I was slowly becoming more religious again. Okay, I was in Basel among Jews, came back slowly. And I didn't like the idea. So what to do? So I went to this Kraus family. They said, stay with us for Pesach. I don't know what's going to be after that. I got to have a place to go. So I said, you know what? Let's call up the Satmar Rebbe. At that time, he was well ensconced already. I mean, he was all right in Switzerland. I mean, he was given a lot of honors, and money came in already, and he was given a house, he was given servants, and he was okay. I called him up, and I said, here's my situation. And when they heard they want to send him to a Zionist Hachsharad, oh, no, right away, come to Geneva. So I came to Geneva, and I was there from Pesach to Shavuos. I was in the house. I was the only one who asked the kashas, the Rebbe, okay? It was Pesach, the first Pesach. I was the boy, the kid, the Seder, the only one who could ask the kashas. In Shavuos time, he was so well known in Switzerland that they came already from all over Switzerland, from all the cities. Switzerland has some religious Jews, quite a few religious Hasidic Jews. Not Hasidic in the sense that they belong to the Rebbe, but they're sort of in the right wing, okay? And they came to see him in Shavuos. And there, a man asks, who's this boy there? He said, well, he's the son of so-and-so. He's lost his parents, and now he's here alone. And he said, yeah, he's the son of so-and-so. I went to yeshiva with his father. Now, this man married a Swiss girl way back, years back, my father's age, and settled in Switzerland, in Lugano, as a matter of fact, and did very well. He was into business, but he was ordained rabbi. He was a rabbi, but not practicing. He was the same yeshiva as my father, so he knew my father. So they told him the story that he had nowhere to go, and he's meanwhile here, and you don't know what to do with him. I don't know. So he says, you know what, let him come to me. Now this man had 8 children. He took me into the house. Took me. I packed my bag after Shoah, went to Lugano. That was a very nice house, very nice, but I had a lot of pride in me. I didn't like to sit at a table, but I'm just, you know, on charity, you know. I just didn't like the idea. I just didn't like it. Although they were very nice to me, okay?
What was the name of the family?
Friedman. His name, they called him Ralph Friedman, but he was really, he had owned a big textile business in Lugano. And he was related to a very big family in Lugano called Rubinfeld. I don't know if you ever come across, but in Switzerland it's well known. It's a big family to this day. The children of these families I befriended, they were some of my age, and they're now the leaders of Lugano. In fact, they're the ones who are now the head of the leadership there. Anyways, so I didn't like the idea of being a charity case. Children can be very vicious. Children can make you feel like you are. You know, although the parents are very nice to me, but the children sort of made me feel that I was just uninvited. So as soon as I was there, I was making arrangements to be okay. I went to Red Cross. I said, I don't like this idea. I don't like this being. I want to be supported somehow. There, and again, I was lucky in my way. I mean, you know, I think everybody who survived the war somehow always had luck in his way, played in his way. That there was a fine German lady, a refugee from Germany, a Christian woman, who was married to a Jew, a famous actor, famous stage actor, who to this day people heard of the name, know the name, who was thrown out of Germany, and she settled in Lugano. And she wanted to help Jews. She got herself involved with the Red Cross, helping Jews, immigrants. And she spotted me, and she liked me, and she started to talk to me. Want to find out what kind of education I have, how much did I learn, what do I know, and she realized I didn't have much education. Because the public schools in those countries are very poor, and secondly, during the war, I think the last 2 years I didn't go to school at all. So maybe I made 5 grades or something in elementary school. And she's the one who told me that she was giving me a lot of hope and courage that if you have education, you'll be okay in this world, you'll manage, you'll be fine. And the first thing she did is she got me to enroll in some private school to learn, to catch up on math. I didn't know my math, I didn't know very little. I didn't know world history. She gave me books to read. And particularly she took you heard of Berlitz School, the language school? That was very expensive in those days. She took me to a Berlitz school to teach me English, because she knew that I'm going to be ending up somewhere in the Western world, in the English world. And at 15, I started to learn English. And as I said before, I was pretty good in languages. In no time, I learned Italian. I went to Italian school, and I learned English very fast. And German, because she gave me German books. She was a German woman. She always gave me Germans to read. World history, world this and that, all kind of things. And she took me under her wings, practically, on this level. And in order to be able to sustain myself, she encouraged me to learn a trade fast, so I should have what to. So she encouraged me to take, you heard of ORT? ORT is an organization that teaches trades to Jewish people. It exists to this day. And to teach me shirt cutting, being a cutter in shirts, okay, a cutter. It's fast, you can learn it in 6 weeks, you can be a cutter and get a job. And this was great to me because I hated to go to collect my checks every week or so from the Red Cross. And so she encouraged me to do that, and I learned that, and I got a job right away. The picture I showed you the other day was the factory was 50 kilometers away from Lugano, and I traveled every morning, 6 o'clock, I traveled to my job. And so I was fine. In Lugano, I was great. I had a room, I was able to sustain myself. I rented a room, and I was paying my own food. I was going to a restaurant. And I had, in fact, the best time of my life was in Lugano. I befriended the people the Friedman and the Rubinfeld family, who were the elite of that community there at the time. They had a country home. They took me to their home in the summertime. I learned how to drive a bicycle the real way. And I would say it was a pretty good period in my life at that time in Switzerland.
What was the name of the lady who helped you?
The name of the lady, her name, the name of the name is Moseyev. That was the name. Was a very famous actor. In fact, he showed me all the pictures from his stage acting. And since he was a Jew, he was not even a Jew from both parents, the way she explained to me, just from one parent. It was not good enough for him, so he had to leave filming.
And her name, her first name?
I don't know her first name, no. She was an old lady at that time. She was a great old lady, nice lady. Never forget her for the encouragement she gave me. She used to tell me how important it is to be educated, and education is everything, and knowledge is everything. And learn language, learn this, learn that. And I did. I went to night classes, and I did equal high school at the time. That's as far as my education goes. I didn't go further than high school. The rest is self-taught. Whatever I know is what I read. I like to read a lot. But anyways, to get back to my history after Switzerland, remember I told you that the Swiss government had an agreement with the organizers of this transportation that everybody will leave eventually Switzerland. So I used to be hammered every few months from the Swiss Fremdenpolizei, the refugee police, to ask, what are you doing on behalf of immigration? You have to show them something, anything, a document that I wrote somewhere, made an application. And I got fed up with this. I said, this is no future. They're not going to let me stay here. So whenever there was an opportunity to leave somewhere, I wanted to go. Now, America, I wanted to go to America, but it was impossible because there was the quota system in America. They have a quota for every country. And since at that time Romania was part, I mean, that part of the world became Romania. Romania had the worst quota of all. It had to take 20 or 30 years before my turn comes. So that was out. Israel I didn't want to go to. The Canadian government had a program where they had granted the Jews in Canada, the Jewish Congress of Canada, that they'll take in at 1,000 war orphans. Up until 18 years they consider war orphans. And so a friend of mine registered and went, came first, and he wrote to me how good it is. And what he particularly told me that you eat every day as good as you eat Shabbos in Switzerland. that was the big attraction. Anyways, truth matters, food is very cheap in Canada those days. Anyway, and I then registered to one of these transports, and I arrived in Canada in May 1948.
What was your friend's name?
His friend's name was Matek Cohen. Yeah.
Did you have any contact with the Rebbe in that period?
No contact whatsoever. He went to Israel in 1945, as I mentioned before, and I stayed on till 1948. Actually, I lost contact when I left Geneva. I lost contact since then.
What was that like living with him for the period after the war?
It was very nice. I think he was a great man. I mean, really. I mean, he's very humorous. He likes to make jokes all the time. They're usually with a message. Those jokes usually wants to tell you something. Usually it's Musar, but it's always in a nice joking way. And he's a very patient man. He was a very nice man, really. I mean, one knew him one-to-one. But he was very strong in his beliefs, very strong. And he was a saint. I can tell you he was not sleeping. He never went to bed. From Shabbos to Shabbos, he was just being up all night, studying, but of course he was falling asleep at night, but he woke up, studied again. That was his way of life.
At the end of tape 6. Seven of survivors of the Shoah interview with Jack Gross. So when did you come to Canada?
The spring of 1948.
Did you consider going to Israel at all?
No, never considered going to Israel. What motivated me at the time is perhaps my Satmar background, perhaps, I don't know, maybe subconsciously. Didn't think very highly of the Zionist ideal, being that it was secular, wasn't started by religious. There was no religion involved at all. I read the book from Herzl, the Judenstaat, and I was very turned off because his biggest accomplishment would have been Friday night to go to Jewish theater instead of Saturday night like it is done in Europe, but his goal was Friday night. But no mention of anything that had anything to do with our tradition or anything like that. So that was just one example. But I mean, there was many other things that perhaps from my childhood, perhaps it was inoculated that the Zionists are no good or something. But later on when I started to reason, I had other reasons obviously, and I don't think I want to dwell on this too much, what my reason was. But suffice it to say that Canada was my next place of future. That was my future, and I did a little more schooling there, of course more English. I took more English, and took a little side lessons in law. I thought at one time maybe I want to go to school, but that was not to be, because see what happened was the Jewish Congress was very nice to us and all, but it only supported us for about 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and then you're on your own. It's like America, you're on your own. It's a free country, and you can starve on your own or you make it big on your own, but you're still on your own. And so I had the advantage of having had a trade in Switzerland, is shirt cutting. So I went to work as a shirt cutter and earned very little, hardly enough. But anyway, and I didn't like it because it was a different system. In Switzerland, it was a profession. It was a respected profession. Like everything else in Switzerland, they do it right. They do it well. Here in America, it's mass production, and there was no skill involved. There was all machinery. There was no handwork. I didn't like it for two reasons. A, the pay was very underpaid. Of the reasons I just said, it wasn't a respected trade. It was just a menial trade. And secondly, I didn't like the disrespect I got in working there. I was just nobody. In Switzerland, I had a white shirt. I was somebody. I was somebody. Anyway.
What city
Well,
were
go
you?
figure. This was my thinking at the time.
What city were you living in?
In Montreal. Yeah. So after a few weeks, I left, and I hooked up with a very enterprising young man, my same age, 18 years old, who was after the war was in Germany and in Hungary, all over these countries, and he was doing black market. He was introduced to the world of business at this young age. And he would never go to work. He would that never entered his mind. He even came with money from Europe. I didn't have no money. I had maybe $20 in my pocket. But anyway, and he suggested to me, let's go into business. What business? What can we go in business, 18-year-old? There was an old man with a grocery store. Let's buy his store up. So I went into the grocery business for 1 year. I went in the grocery business. Of course, it didn't work out. Didn't make a living. We didn't know anything about the grocery business. So we gave up. He left Canada. He had a brother in America. He lives in Miami. He's very successful.
What's his name?
Simon. What's his last name? I'm not in touch with him anymore. Simkovich. Simon Simkovich, that was his name. Simon Simkovich. In fact, our store's name was Sidejack. My name is Jack, and his name is Sidejack. That was the name of the store. Anyways, it didn't last long. We gave it up, we sold it, made a little profit. So it was my first acquaintance with business. That was my first deal in business. I never was in business before. And then I saw how different it is that you can make more money in business than working. I never went back to be a shirt cutter anymore. And from there, I became a salesman for a jewelry wholesaler. Went to call on stores for a little while. I made a little money, and I got ambitious. I said, I'm going to go on a trip. I went to Europe, and I went to Israel. That was in 1951. I went to Israel already. I was one of the first tourists of Israel. It was an interesting experience as a tourist. But anyway,
Did you go back to your hometown?
No, never went back to my hometown because A, I didn't want to see it. I was so angry at those bloody Hungarians. And secondly, I was told by my aunt, who survived, the present Satmar Rebbetzin, who is just 7 years older than me, who I grew up with in my grandfather's house. She went back, and she went to Satmar, and she wrote to me that those places are now occupied by Christians, and they wouldn't let you in. It's impossible to go back to look for treasures. Don't even try. Don't bother. And, people were very disappointed when they came back. They saw the enmity of the people in that place. So I did not go back, no.
Did you find out what happened to your family?
Of course, I found out after the war. The big task at the time was to go through the joint to find relatives and friends and so on. And I did the same. I inquired to the Red Cross and the joint and all this. And I found out that two eyewitnesses who were there with my mother and children, I even found out the date when they were taken to the gas chambers. The date was when it's Shoah's is 6, 7 of Nis, 8th day of Sivan, the day after Shoah's, they were taken to the gas chamber.
Where?
In Auschwitz. Yeah.
And who was there with her?
There with her were a family called, also Teitelbaum. They're distant relatives of ours from Satmar, who now live in Brooklyn. They were children. They were also going with their parents, but they were a little older, and they were taken into work camps, and they survived. A brother and a sister. And they told us that they saw them taken.
What was their name?
The name is his name is also Yerkel Teitelbaum. His name is Teitelbaum, Yerkel Teitelbaum. He lives today in Queens. Yeah. And his sister's name, coincidentally enough, is Hendy. Same as my sister's name. We were related, so we're, mind you, distant cousins, but still, so they had the name, they had the same grandparents. Anyway, yeah, they told me, and then subsequently others also, but they were the first one that I found out.
When was that?
What?
That you found out?
That was in right after the war, 1945. When the war ended, when information was going back and forth through these various agencies, when we found out that what happened to, first of all, what happened to the whole Satmar community, and then through intermediaries contacted some of the people who were in Satmar, who were in the camp, saw what happened when they separated people to go to death and those who go into work. And of course, my sister probably stuck with her mother all the time, and she probably, who knows what happened.
And all your siblings?
Oh, they all gas chamber.
And your uncle in Budapest?
He survived in Budapest. He survived, yeah. But if you ask me about my uncle, then let me say about my mother. My mother had 6 brothers and sisters, and only one survived. My father had 7 brothers and 2 sisters, and 3 of them survived.
What was the name?
The names from my mother's side is the Nir Batarov. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's in Brooklyn. He's no longer alive. His son is now the Nir Batarov.
What was his full name?
Lipa Teitelbaum. And the other one from my mother's family is my aunt, the Pesalaya Teitelbaum, the now Rebbetzin of Satmar, who married Moshe Teitelbaum, who was the Sigeter of after the war. He was first Siget. And from my father's side, there was, no longer alive, called the Keres Tirarov in Miami, lived in Miami. He has 6 or 7 surviving children. They live in Muncie. They're named Gross family. It's a known family in Muncie. They're all in the printing business. And then I have an aunt who's still alive. She's close to 100 years now, or maybe she's 100 already. Her married name is Horowitz. They live in Borough Park. They have children. They're in the diamond business. And who else survived? I think that's all.
So what did you do in Canada?
In Canada, I went, as I said, I did a little business. I made a little money on selling the store. I worked for a jewelry store. I made a little money, and I went on a trip. When I came back from this trip, I went into another kind of business, an insecticide business. I was selling for someone insecticide to farmers, agriculture. And then I went into business myself. I did some of my own until 1961, when I met and married my wife in Brooklyn, New York.
What's her name?
Her name is Pearl. Her maiden name is Weiss. And she came back to Canada with me, and I went into a different business.
What?
She didn't like the insecticide business. I was traveling too much, and it was seasonal. It was strictly summer. In the winter, there was no income. So I went to the construction business. That's when I started to go into, well, actually, I didn't go into construction first. I was dabbling in real estate, buying old houses, fixing up, and renting it, and selling it, and buying it. And then before long, I became a builder. I got into a venture with some other boys, survivors, with whom I went into construction, built some apartment buildings. It was an instant success. Rented, sold, went another one, and so that's how I became a builder. So since 59 is when I started in real estate. 62 is when I became a real, fully involved in the building business.
Who were your partners?
One name was Perlis. The other name was, I don't forget his last name anymore. He moved also away from Canada. Now, in Canada, the situation changed to the effect that the Quebec, we lived in Montreal, Quebec, which is French, 80% French. The French in Quebec were kept down by the rest of Canada, almost like the blacks in America. And so there was a revolt, sort of semi-revolt, and they wanted independence, what they call separatism. Separatism became, to the point, it became very bad that they resorted to violence. They had mail bombs in the mailboxes and all kinds of threats like this. And they were talking seriously about separating, and as usual, turns against Jews all the time. Whenever there was a problem in their own inner workings, they always looked for a minority. And not only the Jews, they're English also. Of course, there was a lot of Anglo-Saxon population in Canada, in Montreal. They turned against them and against the Jews. And being a war survivor, I said, I'm not going to go through this again. This smacked of nationalism, and that's how it starts in every country. And I saw it blacker than it really was. So I made a decision in 1969 to leave Canada. It so happened that I didn't like Canada altogether. It was too cold. The climate was too cold, and the winter's too long. So we decided to come to America, made the move.
Where did you come to here?
Came here first to Queens, to Kew Gardens. Lived there for 5 years in Kew Gardens. Being that I had experience building, that's the only thing I wanted to do here. And it took a while to get into it, so I traveled a lot to get myself acquainted with the areas. I traveled a lot, and Jersey was the first choice, one to build. But Jersey at that time was, again, very difficult because of sewer moratorium. We had a problem here with sewers at that time. The environmentalists, as you know, Jersey is always first on environmental. And they already started in Jersey with with sewers being discharged into rivers and so on. They didn't allow it, so it started to be restrictions on what you can build and so on. So somebody suggested Pennsylvania, that they're still open. So, and Pennsylvania is not that far. So we went there. I liked the place. I liked the fact that A, there's no restrictions. B, there was a good workforce. It's a mix of Amish and Dutch. Not so much Amish, Dutch people. They still have the good work ethic. So I decided to buy land there and start there. That was in 1970, 71. And have been there since, ever since. We moved the family in to Allentown, Pennsylvania in 1975. Or was it 76? I think 76. And lived there till 1993. Built a house there for the family and was involved in business there, and are still involved in business. We live now in Jersey because Allentown does not have a very large Jewish population, and he wanted the children to grow up among Jews and to know youngsters and so on. And we'll move to Jersey, and we're here only, so far, only on weekends because the business is still in Allentown, Pennsylvania. My children, I have 3 sons.
What are the names?
Michael, Ronald, and Robert. And 2 of them got married since we moved here. So it was a good move already. Robert got married 3 years ago, and Ronald got married 2 years ago. Michael's still a bachelor. And so one of my son, Ronald, is with me in the business in Allentown. My youngest son, who all went through the education system and is an architect, lives in Manhattan. I'm sorry, lives in Brooklyn but works in Manhattan. And my oldest son is a lawyer, lives in Manhattan.
Yeah. Did your relationship with God change?
Yes. Well, okay. My relationship with God. When I was in Lugano is a religious community. I don't know if you ever heard of Lugano. Lugano has a nucleus of 20 families, very, very religious. And one of them was this Friedman family, the Friedman who took me to his house. He was a very learned man. And he had a daughter, he had all girls, and the oldest daughter, and he wanted to teach somebody Gemara. So he taught his daughter Gemara. But when he came in the house, he said, he has a boy to teach Gemara. Great. So he learned Gemara together with his daughter. So anyways, he showed me how to learn, the real way of learning. Okay, I would say I learned more in Lugano in those 3 years, everything, whether it's secular or in Jewish, than all my previous years in Satmar. I'm not considering myself a learned man, but I do know the book. I like to learn. I'm a regular attendant this year here. And so since then, since Lugano, I am religious in a modern way, okay? I had some ups and downs, like we all have in our young lives, especially when I was a bachelor. I did some things, sometimes things that I perhaps might regret today. But overall, I was, yes, I stayed religious in a modern way, Now, if I may add something, some comments about the part that saved me in the war. That even though I'm very grateful that I'm saved and I'm alive today, and sometimes I wonder why am I alive, what I had the privilege to be over my 6 other siblings and my mother. That thought haunts me a lot. But I'm sure God had a purpose. I consider that one of the purposes is to have a nice family, have 3 wonderful children. They carry on the name with great dignity, although they're not in exactly the same conduct, the same way as my grandparents would have been, but I'm sure they would be proud of them just the same. So perhaps this was the purpose. But at the same time, I hold the whole episode as being a tragedy for Hungarian Jewry. I consider that the Kastner episode is what I would say destroyed, I would say all, but a big part of Hungarian Jewry. Because Hungarian Jewry, their turn when it came was at the end of the war, towards the end of the war, and time was the great essence. And our stupid leaders didn't realize that stalling would have been the tactic, not telling us stalling or running, do anything, not telling us comply and go like sheep, and not only telling us, but misleading us, telling us falsehoods, that they're taking us to some kind of a farm where you'll have to work farm. Yes, you'll have to work hard, it's farm work, but you'll be with your families, you'll be given food. I mean, this was written down, this is not hearsay, rumors, this is facts. I don't have that pamphlet with me, whoever thought of this, they used to have to save things like that, but this is a fact. Now, this is a fact which sometimes I had doubts, but memory didn't serve me right, so on. But books were written about this episode, particularly one book that I recommend very highly, that's Perfidy. Not because of everything what he says about Jewish leadership. Yes, he's very harsh on Jewish leadership, especially the Zionist organization, because they were the leaders, the only organized group at the time that could have helped. I'd say it did help, but could have helped. They had at least the communication, the means to communicate. They had agency. The Jewish agency had offices all over the Jewish world. They didn't. Not only they didn't, but they misled. It is the Jewish agency of Budapest who was the Judenrat. It's one and the same, not to be mistaken. And they're the ones who told us, comply, don't run, don't do anything. Aside from being the time element was so close, it was also Hungary was surrounded by, Hungary has a large border with Romania. There was a lot of chances for people, for instance, Cluj itself, his own community, his own community, was just a few kilometers away from the border. They themselves could have just en masse walked out of the ghetto, and there was just a few old First World War veterans who were guarding them. Take away the rifles and just march. So a few hundred get killed, but march. They told him just the opposite. He came personally to tell them the opposite. Don't run, don't do anything, because this too is well recorded in this book, this Ben Hur. Now, that's the place where he took his 400 people out, okay? Now, the very fact that he took 400 people away and didn't tell them go with the rest because you'll be saved shows that he knew what he was doing, that he knew that something terrible is happening. And that is the treachery of the Jewish leadership. That, I think, is unforgivable, and I think more should be talked about. Now, why should be more talked about now after 50 years? The lesson is simply this. Don't trust all the time the leaders. Question the leadership. Don't always trust them. Unfortunately, we were taught in Galut that Jews have to stick together, and the Jews like to love each other because nobody else will protect us. But history, recent history, Zionism has shown that when it comes to power, when it comes to governance, we're not different than all the Goyim. That is, everything, every means is allowed in order to reach your goal. That we're not, these are not the Galut Jews that we know from yesteryear. That the Jews of the Zionist organization, of the founding Zion, not today, of course, may be different, the second, third generation, the founding Zionist organization, were the Jews who were disgruntled socialists, disgruntled communists, who couldn't do what they wanted to do in their own country, in communism, under the Tsar. They came to Palestine, they started kibbutzim, which is communist, which is strictly pure communism. In the only place in the world where this existed, by the way, that you could experiment with something like this. And these people are just as ruthless, were just as ruthless in achieving their goal of Palestine at the expense of anything. And in this case, I'd say expense of European Jewry. Hungarian Jewry was just a microcosm of the total, okay? I don't think they could have done that perhaps in Poland, because perhaps they didn't know what's awaiting, that was the first. But after what happened in those countries, and if it took only these Polish boys to tell me personally what's awaiting, surely they knew what's going. When they sent Hanna Senes to Hungary, she didn't come with any weapons, she didn't make a revolution. All she was supposed to do is spread the word, run, do something, because the worst is awaiting you. That's all she's supposed to do. So what happened? They arrested her, and Kastner never visited her, never even came to see her. Why? That would have spoiled his plan. Because the deal was that cooperation, you'll get your 1,200 people. You save your 1,200 people. Cooperate, you'll get your 1,200 people. That is the biggest tragedy that happened to Hungarian Jewry and to Jewry in general.
Thank you.
Is it finished? The tape is finished? Jack Gross. I'm on this picture as an identity card for my commutes to, from Lugano to my working place in Switzerland. It was a yearly pass, and this is how I traveled on a daily basis. The picture was taken in Lugano, Switzerland.
What year?
Approximately 1946, 47. Okay, this is our wedding portrait with my young bride. I'm Jack Gross. My wife's maiden name is Pearl Weiss. After this, Pearl Gross, of course.
Where was it taken?
This was taken in New York, right after the wedding, at the Riverside Plaza in 1961, November 1961. Okay. This picture is of myself, Jacob, at that time Jacob Gross, in Switzerland, when I arrived from Germany at the border in St. Gallen. And I guess this is the number of my police records there, or the police file. It is taken in I would say December of 1944.
Okay, Jack, can you introduce your family for us?
Sure. This is my wife, Pearl, my son, Michael, my son, Ronald, my son, Robert, his wife, Abigail, and Ronald's wife, Pearl. And this is my granddaughter, little Cassie, who's named after my mother, by the way, right, sir.
I just wanted to ask you what if you had any contact after the war with the Satmar Rebbe?
Very little. I went to see him day before, a couple of days before my wedding, and we joked a lot and talked about. I also went to see him in Sharon Spring in 1962 or 63, and I was amazed at his memory. At that time, he reminded me of an incident. I came to complain to him about the fact that they were not allowed to lick out the cans. That there was a man by the name of Stern, who was the leader in Budapest, and he was favoring his children to lick out, and I said, I'm not allowed to do that. And he asked me at the time, in Hungarian, in fact, he says, remember Kondenyalash? And I forgot about it, and he remembered that little incident. So it shows the man was a great man.
When did he pass away?
He passed away in 1982, I believe.
Where?
22, in New York, in Brooklyn, New York. His levaya was in Monroe. I was there. It was one of the biggest levayas that I've ever witnessed. There was maybe 100,000 people there.
Would anybody else in the family like to speak about, did your father talk much about his experiences when you were younger?
I guess, Michael, as we got older and as we became aware and inquisitive, we would, I guess, occasionally prod my father. My father would sometimes talk about an incident if something occurred to him, but my father doesn't generally tell stories about himself, so we have pieces here and there, and actually we're all anxiously awaiting to see this videotape to put them all together. I'm sure I speak for my siblings, who will have something to say also, that we're all extremely proud of my father, and he's a tremendous role model in that seeing what he's come from, through, and what he's achieved is just something that I know I can't compare with ever, and we love him very much.
I'm Robert. I just wanted to add that actually when I was in 10th grade, so that was about 1983, I had an assignment to interview somebody, and I decided to interview my father about his Holocaust experiences. So I had, like a 90-minute tape, audio tape of the experience, and my understanding was that was the first time that my father had sat down and really talked at length about it at all. So hopefully maybe that had something to do with a little bit where we get to today. Anyway.
As my sons were saying, he really never liked to talk about his experiences during the war. It was a very personal thing with him. He did, though, talk to me about it. I guess being his wife, he had to talk to somebody. But a very funny thing that I can tell you that it really had to do with his experience in the concentration camp. Whenever we go on a trip, he's going to laugh. We always have to take food with us. It's not that he's a big eater or appetite, but this feeling of hunger or depriving of food, and we joke about it, we can go on a half-an-hour trip in the car, but I have to have food there, anything. Did you bring food? And it's interesting that he was a very young boy, how this remained with him at this stage in his life. I mean, we're going back 50 years, and there's certain things that in you that could never be taken away.
Thank you.